I, I learned a lot in my PhD program, but spending time with my uncle, I learned it was like uh, a traditional knowledge PhD, like living it, you know. Kwekwasan, good morning. Tasuis Casey Thornbrugh on the Thomas Mississippi. I'm Casey Thornbrugh, called Casey Thornbrugh. I'm a citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and I was just saying I'm of Mashpee. Um, Wampanoag comes from Wampanoag, which means east, or those of the east. Um, I think our ancestors understood themselves to be on the ocean and kind of the first people to see the sunrise. Language is really important to me, and I try not to take words for granted. So I just start with like the knowledge piece. I mean, that's something that every human society has to, where they're from, and has developed, passed down through family, through teachings and things like that. Um, and so everyone has that. And I think, when we do like ecological, that's kind of where like maybe like Western science influence on like how you look at the world, like if it's ecological in the natural environment. But every environment is natural and some composed of we humans, we might arrange it in a certain way to our fitting and things like that. But and then the traditional aspect, I mean, looking at knowledge, not just the knowledge that's passed down, but like how it's used. I think that's where tradition comes in, because with like, if we just say traditional knowledge, if we take out like ecological or whatever, there's like rules on how to use the knowledge, and etiquette, and it can be like misused and things like that. So I think it comes with like a responsibility. um so I have like family members and elders in my community that will like, you know I guess share something when they feel that person is ready, and also that that person has like a level of responsibility or maturity that they can have that. So traditional ecological knowledge is just it's it's knowledge. It has a very place based um, characteristic to it, and the traditional is just that which is passed down, including the etiquette and ethics and responsibility around
Yeah.
that knowledge. I think the more people that at least have an understanding of this, it's going to be helpful. Traditional knowledge is a relationship component there too, and a relationship to a space or to a place. Um, I think that why it's important that it's, you know, included, considered, is, if you're going to live in a space, if you're going to live in that place, um, it's important to understand how to live with it. Tribal nations and cultures are, what widely diverse in teachings and culture, language, manners, and things like that. But there's some things that kind of I found to be in common as I've gone to different like tribal nations and communities. And um, sometimes, as an example, I found when meeting with elders from other tribal nations and some of my own tribal nation and community, like the concept or how they understand the word management, they don't actually use that or prescribe to using that as much, because it implies like a control over what's going to happen. And I guess where they go is more of like living with it. And I mean, if we say that Indigenous people, Native Americans in the US, if we make up like 1.5% or something of the population, and we all went like full blown like traditional knowledge and everything, and we're doing all these things, um, they're the 98%. I think it's important for people to know and have this understanding because, um, in terms of the continent, we all live together right now, so we kind of got to figure these things out, to some extent together. Because I think if it's only us Native folks, it's good for us because it helps us to continue and everything like that. But like the continent and the environment, they need everyone on board to kind of try to figure it out. So. I don't know if it's more. I prefer more knowledge sharing than knowledge integrating. Um, because with knowledge sharing, you get some knowledge and you can kind of find how that can be applicable and how you can use it. So respect and balance maybe are two keywords. The first and foremost is like the respect aspect, because I think when you approach, for example, like traditional knowledge, um, and you approach it in a way that you kind of honor that it can stand on its own and its merit, like it has its way and its reasons, um, and because I think what sometimes can happen is people will come and say, this I'd like to integrate this traditional knowledge into Western science, and it makes Western science kind of sound foundational, and the traditional knowledge is like gonna make Western science better, but like instead of kind of just saying, as you were like in people to people relationships, you respect for someone for who they are. you know we all learn from each other, and that's really important, but you don't try to get someone to change too much or fit your needs. You try to find that mutuality of like, respecting that a person or a body of knowledge stands on their own and they have value, on their own. And um, and I think, um, maybe acknowledging, like, just like with words, not taking things for granted, just acknowledging that, culture is a real big part of it. Like with Western science, there's a cultural influences there, um, and how it's done, and maybe even why it's done. There's gonna be different schools of thought, and some don't necessarily want to integrate, traditional knowledge and Western science. And I dealt with that a little bit in my PhD. I was thinking of, like traditional knowledge and Western science in the context of like teaching science, in a classroom, especially in a tribal college or, schools, in Native, communities. But I think, there were times where some thought that was a really good idea, and others that were like, don't do it in a way that like reduces or attempt or inadvertently, um, dilutes, our the knowledge, or things like that. Again, with my class, I'm trying to teach like, okay, well, here's aspects from like traditional knowledge and aspects from like Western science. I had a couple folks, as I'm talking about traditional knowledge, they're like, cool, we know that we're actually in this class to learn some to learn this Western science stuff that we haven't had the chance to like do that, and then they could take that with and take what's useful and leave what is not. But it's also respecting where, students are at and what they want to learn. And then of course I had other students that maybe didn't know and have as much experience around traditional knowledge, and they were like, oh yeah, this is really cool, I want to learn more of this. So you try to find that balance. So Cape Cod, um, there's a large prevalence of pitch pine, and they call them the pine barrens, where these areas of forest where pines and oak, kind of a scrub oak. It's interesting. I'm not sure if you've had the chance to visit Cape Cod or be on there, but it looks very different than other eastern forests. The
Okay.
trees are smaller. It looks some areas look scrubby, almost like places out west. You're like fire has always been a part of the landscape, and um, our ancestors regularly would burn areas of the landscape. And it's interesting how we know this. We know this through our traditional knowledge, but we also know this because the English, the Puritans, when they came over, they wrote these things in their journals. And some of those observations included, and not so polite language, but of Indigenous people um, around Cape Cod and Massachusetts and everything regularly burning it, which is something that we did. In the 1800s, Massachusetts looked very much like prairie land. I mean, there's lots of pasture and everything, and a few trees and rock walls separating properties and things like that. With the exception of like Mashpee. Mashpee is where our tribe maintained, and we had an agreement, um, that we could, you know, keep this land around us, and we kept the forest mostly intact. Um, and uh, I guess all that agriculture and things like that slowed down, or the Northeast became more industrialized, and a lot of those forests kind of came back, including on Cape Cod. But there started to be a lot of fires, big time ones, like uh, especially on Cape Cod, those pitch pine woodlands. And as Cape Cod got more populated, again, there was this like, we have to suppress all fires because, and I could understand what people are thinking is, yeah, if it gets out of control and goes through a community, then that's a really dangerous situation. But Cape Cod was rural, and it was transitioning from a rural peninsula to a very populated um, tourist destination, but also like permanent towns and everything. So fires were pretty largely suppressed. When you looked at the forest, people who understood fires would tell you like, you have got a lot of ladder fuels just building up. I mean, if this goes, it's going to go bad, you know. And there that was a concern kind of over in Cape Cod. People were like, there's that you might need to think about this, well, kind of coming back to our tribe, when I was working with our tribe, we had been approached by the Department of the Interior and U.S. Fish and Wildlife because there was a particular species, New England cottontail, that was in danger of being listed as a threatened species.
Mhm.
It needs that scrub oak habitat. It needs this low-lying habitat, basically, so it can hide from hawks.
Yeah.
And have shelter and things like that. So my uncle, when thinking about our family, he's like, um, we need to do some burns here. And it was an interesting thing because he talked to the town of Mashpee. So there's the tribe of Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and then there's the town. And so, he talked to the town. Town's like, no, no, we put out fires. We don't start fires, you know. So I guess it was kind of tough to kind of get everyone on board. And even some of our own tribal folks, because it had been generations since we had done fires.
Mhm.
And so people were talking about like, start fires. And then we're like, our people used to do this on a regular basis. And we dug up all these journals from the Puritans and whatnot. We're like, this is kind of what we did. So we were able to work with a consultant, fire management, and have U.S. Fish and Wildlife kind of weigh in on it and have the town on board to be able to do these burns in these pine barren areas. Um, we had some of our staff, our tribal staff, get you got to follow the rules. So you got to get certified to be on a burn and go through that. But what happened after the burn reminded us of why we used to do it all the time. Those areas that were burned, a year to 2 years later, the blueberry bushes came back like crazy. The scrub oak canopy came back in. There was spacing in between the larger trees. Um, so a lot of culturally important plants came back. And it was so amazing because we have a youth camp for environmental, uh, for middle school students, tribal middle school students, these areas that got burned, and show them that, like, this is what happens after you come back, and you avoid a catastrophic crown fire. um, B, you bring back a lot of traditional plants and traditional foods, and sustain habitat for the New England cottontail and probably everything else in that ecosystem. Um, so we had these kids out there just picking blueberries and teaching some of that etiquette too, because responsibility is, I was trying to teach kids to like harvest in threes. So the idea is, if you have like three berries, take one for yourself, leave one for the animals, and leave one to propagate new blueberries. So it's so you don't clean the place out. But that traditional knowledge is like, we had it hundreds of years ago. um, the practice was kind of suppressed, and so people didn't weren't permitted to do it as much. And then generations went by, and then we had to kind of come back to a spot where we're like, yeah, this is what we need to do.